And hello, everybody. My name is Jennifer Widman. I'm with the South Dakota Center for the Book, which hosts the South Dakota Festival of Books and Young Readers Festival through the South Dakota Humanities Council. And I really am so glad that you're joining us here today at this virtual 2020 event. We always love to spend time with readers of all ages, celebrating books one way or another, whether we're in person or we're far away as we are today. I want to mention that the festival would not be possible without the generous donations of some of our sponsors. If you've ever seen this festival guide, you'll see their information on the back, and it's also on our website, sdbookfestival.com. With the help of those sponsors, we have almost a dozen authors and illustrators of children's and young adults books that will be joining us one way or another, and we hope that you all enjoy getting to hear from them. I also want to mention that on our website, sdbookfestival.com, there will be buttons that will take you directly to some bookstore links where you can buy these books. You can also go to the South Dakota Historical Society Press site to buy The Voice of Liberty and other books. So you can get those books online, even though we don't have an in-person bookstore this year. So today's presentation focuses on a book called The Voice of Liberty. And our two featured presenters are Angelica Carpenter and Edwin Fotheringham. And I will just tell you a brief bit about each of them. Angelica Shirley Carpenter is Curator Emerita of the Arnie Nixon Center for the Study of Children's Literature at California State University, Fresno. She's published 4 middle grade biographies of classic children's authors and a YA biography, Born Criminal, Matilda Joslyn Gage, Radical Suffragist. Her picture book, which we're talking about today, The Voice of Liberty, illustrated by Edwin Fotheringham, comes out in September 2020. She is a past president of the International Wizard of Oz Club, an advisory board member for the Lewis Carroll Society of North America, and of course, many other professional affiliations. And then her illustrator, Edwin Fotheringham. Am I saying that correctly, Ed? Close anyway?
Very close.
Very close. He spent his formative years in Sydney, Australia. He was educated at the University of Washington School of Art in Seattle, where he still lives with his family. He illustrated his first book for children, What to Do About Alice, in 2008. And since then, he's addressed subjects and markets as varied as punk rock in Neiman Marcus, the New Yorker and the Ladies' Home Journal, and a Visa credit card campaign and an elementary school auction. And his most recent book is, as we said, The Voice of Liberty. And guiding this conversation today is Jennifer McIntyre with the South Dakota Historical Society Press, which published The Voice of Liberty. And she has been working with the two creators since the beginning. So I will let Jennifer, Angelica, and Ed take it away. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us. As Jennifer just introduced me, I'm Jennifer McIntyre. I am the marketing director for the South Dakota Historical Society Press. I am pleased and enthused to be a part of this virtual session, and actually going to hand the ball off to Angelica Shirley Carpenter right away to briefly introduce The Voice of Liberty and kind of run all of you through kind of the ins and outs of the book and how it came to be, and then we'll have a discussion between the three of us about things that she's brought up and other points of interest. So thank you, Angelica. Go ahead.
Okay, well, hi everybody. I'm sorry we can't be there in person, but I know you'll be thrilled to have a PowerPoint about our book. So I first started writing with my mother, Jean Shirley. And Mother, who's on the left in this picture, is holding our picture book about our biography of L. Frank Baum. And I know that's a name that means something to people in South Dakota because he lived in Aberdeen and he wrote the Oz books. And Mother and I were both childhood Oz fans, so we were thrilled to get to write a book about L. Frank Baum. When we're writing, we always look for pictures, and here's a picture of a very young L. Frank Baum before he got married. Before he wrote any Oz books. He's getting married here. And here's the beautiful woman he married, Maud Gage. They got married at her family home. And it was when I was writing this book with my mother that I first became aware of Maud's mother. Her name was Matilda Jocelyn Gage, and she was very famous. When L. Frank Baum married her daughter, he was pretty much unknown, but Matilda was a nationally known leader in the women's rights movement. So I did a lot of research for this book because this is a young adult biography. It's a full-length book. I went to the Library of Congress where I read her scrapbooks. I read her letters, which are at Radcliffe, and her terrible handwriting. That took me a long time. I read the books she wrote and the newspaper that she bought and edited. And from doing that, I learned that she was very good at staging protests. And so even after that book was finished, I decided to write a picture book about just one protest that she staged. Here's what my manuscript looked like when I sent it in to the publisher. This is a Word document. We do our work by email. And here's what it looked like when the editor sent it back to me the first time. And some people are shocked by this, but really it's the editor's job to find mistakes, make suggestions, and give new ideas for the book. So the editor and I together settled on the text for this picture book about a demonstration. And then when that part was done, and when the text was done, my work was pretty much done, except I had the wonderful job of choosing someone to dedicate the book to, and I dedicated it to my granddaughter, who's a strong, smart young woman. So then my job is done, but then the illustrator's job comes. And our illustrator, oh, it was so exciting to learn that it would be Edwin Fotheringham. I don't know if you want to say anything about the cover right here, Ed.
Yeah, sure. I'll say something about the cover. I hope you all like the cover. I like the cover, but the cover didn't always look like this. The cover was actually from an opposite point of view when I did my first sketches for it. I sort of, well, I drew it from the point of view of the people in the boats below the Statue of Liberty, looking up at her face and the windows in her crown, with the three women, the suffragettes, in the windows, I think pulling back the French flag or something like that. Anyway, and our editor, well, sort of liked the aspect, but not the point of view, or like the general direction, but not the point of view. So I went completely opposite and went from above the Statue of Liberty's head, looking down at the suffragettes in their boat and all the other boats around them. And I'm so glad that that decision was made. And the reason I'm glad is it made a much more active cover, and I'm really happy with it. And it wouldn't have happened if I wasn't told to do that. So,
and when I saw it, I was thrilled. I mean, I thought it was such an unusual perspective, and I think you're known for that in your illustrations. Some people might wonder why anybody would protest a beautiful statue like the Statue of Liberty. But a lot of people, young people, don't know that for most of the country's history, women were not allowed to vote. So these women thought, why should liberty be portrayed as a woman when women couldn't even vote? And so they decided that they would have a demonstration, just like people are demonstrating now and marching now to make a point. They decided to do the same thing at the dedication of the Statue of Liberty in 1886. So Ed and I did not work actively together on this book, but I had accumulated a lot of research pictures, photographs, which I sent to him. So here's a photograph of Matilda Jocelyn Gage, L. Frank Baum's mother-in-law, and she also lived in Aberdeen for off and on for years. And then there's Ed's picture of her in the book. Here's her friend Lily Devereux Blake, who's a really frilly kind of person, and the illustration. And this is Lily's daughter, Katie Devereux Blake. I couldn't find a picture of her when she was young, but Ed was so good he was able to take this picture when she was older and use it to make her look young. So the book begins with the three women. This is about 3 or 4 days before the dedication ceremony. The three women are very upset that the Statue of Liberty is a woman. They just don't like it. And Lily says, that statue is a woman, but she can't speak for herself. I say, let's give her a voice. So Lily was the head of the New York State Women's Suffrage Association, and suffrage means voting. So she was head of this organization. She was the president, and Matilda was the vice president. And she wrote a letter to the men in charge of the ceremony, asking to be allowed to speak on behalf of women at the ceremony. And after all, women were half the people in the United States. Well, the men in charge wrote back, no woman would be allowed to speak. No woman would be permitted on the island. Everyone thought the matter was settled. Well, not everyone. So the women applied to ride in a boat parade, and this time they got permission. There was just one problem, and here, this is one of my research pictures. The only boat they could get was a cattle barge. Now imagine standing on this cattle barge when the cows are still there, stomping around and mooing, and then think about taking a deep breath. Think what it smelled like. But the captain promised the ladies that he would have it scoured before they got on. Unfortunately, he did not keep his promise. So there they are. Some of them have gotten on. You see there's Lily holding a banner and holding her nose. And some women even refused to get on. It smelled so bad. But there's Matilda on the pier. She had a cow where she lived in New York State, and she knew what they smelled like. And anyway, nothing would stop these three women. This is my very favorite picture in the book for two different reasons. If you look on the right, you see a little tiny Statue of Liberty way out in the distance. So they're going to sail the boat out there for their protests. And if you look on the left, you see that a cow is leaving the boat. So Ed, I just love that.
Thank you. I enjoyed making that picture. Yeah, it's fun to, well, humor is fun. And humor in children's books is necessary, I think, oftentimes. So it's great to be able to take sort of, you know, this is not an unserious subject, but it does have these humorous elements in it. And that's a great thing. I mean, I think it's important to make things, to sort of lighten them up, make them accessible with humor and color and, you know, sort of joyous things in something that's, you know, there were a lot of parts of the story. I mean, I thought it was very, these women were definitely characters, and that's fantastic. But there was all these sort of elements of, that could be kind of dour, like, you know, the weather was terrible during this entire event. And then the cows and the smell of the ship and all this stuff. But I just thought, I'm just going to lighten this up and make it kind of funny. Like, it's just sort of uncomfortable, but discomfort can be a humorous thing too. So that's what I was doing with the smelly cows.
Well, it was great. When the pictures came that day, I was so excited. It was really thrilling. So anyway, the ladies sailed out toward the statue and they yelled things like votes for women and equal rights now. And some people cheered and clapped for them, but others yelled back very nasty things like man haters, home wreckers. If you don't like it here, go somewhere else, which is what some people tell women right now. So it wasn't so unusual. Anyway, the three women got all the way out to the statue. Maybe this resembles Ed's first cover, I don't know, looking up. And they did make a point. Their protest was covered on the front page of the New York Times newspaper the next morning. And they celebrated. And Lily said what she always did after she finished a project, what shall we do next? So we hope that you will read more about these women and that you will like our book. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelica. Yes. Yeah, and it's just been a pleasure to work on this book, and I'm really excited. We've already gotten a few reviews from national publications like Kirkus, and and it's just been wonderful to see it released out into the world and see both of your works come to fruition. So, you talk a lot about, the research behind a little children's picture book and how it's like, you had to really pare that down. And I'm interested in why both of you, Ed, you have a history of working on historical nonfiction children's books as well. And so, what kind of got you guys into the genre? What made you interested in historical nonfiction?
I guess I'll start. I got a phone call one day, and the book happened to be the manuscript was, a historical fiction manuscript. It was What to Do About Alice by Barbara Curley. And I, prior to that, had, done a lot of work for the New Yorker and stuff like that. And my editor at the publishing house that was publishing that book contacted me because of that work. And I read the manuscript, and I did like it because I thought I'm an Australian, so I had no idea about any of this stuff. And I really enjoy researching it. The thing about doing books for children is that the research doesn't have to be entirely academic. You're like, the way I look at it as a visual person, I try to almost get sort of a layman's point of view about the subject, and sort of do a semi-deep dive, but not so deep that I like, it's easy to sort of go too deep and ruin any sort of whimsy that might come out of the story. So I don't do that. But I do like sinking my teeth into like a research assignment. And I did that book, and it was quite successful. I don't know why. It was good, I guess, but then I just kept getting more work along those lines, and I never said no because I like doing it. And I've done books for small children as well, and I will admit that doing historical biographies for children, for me it's more comfortable. I just prefer it because I like sinking my teeth into the research, regardless of whether I was educated in it or not. Anyway.
Yeah.
Also, maybe being an outsider. I've lived in the United States since 1983. I've been here a long time, but I do think that there might be, I don't know if there's an advantage, but there is you have a clear lens when you're not from a place and you weren't inundated with the history. You look at it like with a totally fresh perspective. And I don't know, I really enjoy that. So.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And Angelica, this is your first, I guess, children's picture book, kind of dipping your toe into the water in that. But you have been working in YA a lot for the books that you've published previously. Same question, I guess. What got you interested in kind of this age group, and what made you turn to crafting a children's picture book?
Well, of course, I've been writing picture books for 30 years. This is just the first one that ever got published, okay? But my mother was a writer all my life and a published author for children, and she wrote children's biographies of Mozart and Leonardo da Vinci, and she wrote lots of books, and it was her idea that we should write one about Frances Hodgson Burnett, who wrote The Secret Garden. But mother had read a book about her, and my mother read Publishers Weekly, like the Bible, and we both knew that there was no children's biography of Frances Hodgson Burnett, except one by her daughter-in-law that left out things like, her divorce and her second marriage and things like that. So we wrote a real biography with pictures, and then our second one was L. Frank Baum. And by that time, I don't know, I just feel comfortable in the Victorian era. I'm glad I don't have to wear corsets or anything, but I like that era. And I like writing about writers because they write about themselves. So that part's always nice. I think of myself as a time traveler or some kind of a literary detective. And I really get involved with these people in their lives, and it's so much fun. It's hard for me to, there's a danger to people, especially librarians like me, called research rapture, where you just keep doing research and keep doing research. I had 400 pages of notes for that book, Born Criminal. That's crazy, but I just love to do it. And so, you know, stopping is what's hard for me. And I just love Victorians. And now that I've done Matilda, 2 books about her, I'm sort of re-aiming myself away from children's authors and more towards the women's movement. That's what I'm working on now.
Well, I'm excited to see what comes out of that. Just kind of along the lines of thinking about historical nonfiction, when you brought up the one image in your PowerPoint of kind of the opening scene with that newspaper, and one of the things, I don't know if you knew, but we saw that illustration originally and really enjoyed it, and then all of a sudden we went, wait, what date did this actually happen? And what was the actual headline? And we spent an afternoon diving through newspapers from New York trying to figure out what the headline is so we could get that to Ed to change and that sort of thing. So it's kind of, how do you balance on the narrative and the illustration side the creativity with the historical accuracy? Because history isn't all excitement, but it's also not entirely dry. But how do you kind of make it fun?
For me?
Yeah, both of you.
Well, yeah, I tend to look for like so in this book, it was, what was I? Yeah, so I think it was the weather. So I look for sort of visual metaphors or things that can run throughout that just tie the whole book together as a visual piece instead of, you know, 40 odd pages, 32 odd, however long it is. You know, I don't want them to just be individual drawings that are just a pure linear narrative. I want there to be something that sort of ties the whole thing together aesthetically. And for this book, it was, I mean, I'm just flipping through it. It's definitely like, there's a couple of things. There's the weather. Like that was a big deal in this. It was raining the whole time and cold and windy. And then there was the pageantry, but the pageantry was sort of taken over by the weather. So like everything is like the flags are moving, the wind is moving, there's all these swirls running throughout it. And so yeah, that's sort of, that's what I latched onto for this particular book. And then stuff like, you know, the maritime stuff. The first thing I did that really got me sort of into it, I guess, was drawing the Statue of Liberty with the flag as a gag. Actually, you know, that was like, that's not in the text. It was just an editorial comment, and being able to bring that into it. I love being able to bring sort of an editorial thing in there that's not in the text but is implied, and that's the job of an illustrator. So
that illustration specifically is one of my favorites, just because, yeah, it definitely was an artistic, you took kind of what was going on and made an illustration that speaks to the text. And yeah, that's a wonderful illustration. I've used it a lot in our ads. So.
Okay. Yeah, I was sort of, you know, sometimes things, you know, epiphanies are weird. They're not always because you're really smart. Sometimes they just happen, and it's like, it's just thunderbolt. So that was that. I mean, I drew it and I was like, oh, that's pretty good. And it's kind of a, you know, lucky moment.
Yeah.
That I got to keep.
Yeah, well, it was great. And Angelica, how when you were taking your research, what did you pull out to kind of create something that was fun and interesting and also poignant and just really said something?
Well, after I finished the first book about Matilda, I just could not get that paddle barge out of my head and that smell. And I just thought how funny it would be for these well-dressed, middle-class women to be getting on this smelly, slippery, awful cattle barge. Also, Matilda had a really funny sense of humor and was sarcastic, so I tried to put a little of that into the dialogue. After the men in charge say that no women will be allowed on the island, some women did get on the island, and I have one of the characters comment about that. And then they hear the French national anthem, and Lily says, women can't vote in France either. So I think that's very much what they were really like, you know. I hope so.
Pulled a lot of the dialogue from the sources that you were looking at, and
Yes.
there was a biography by one of the women, an autobiography or something like that that you used to pull dialogue from.
Yes. Lily wrote an autobiography that wasn't published, but her daughter wrote one about her and quoted from it extensively. And both Lily and Matilda wrote for newspapers all the time, so there were lots of stories. I mean, Lily wrote a story about this day with the Statue of Liberty and what had happened, and so I was able to quote from that. Anyway, I like to put in little jokes too, and I mean, with the smelly cattle boat, that was my funny joke.
My dad used to raise cattle when I was growing up. I can attest to the smell. Yes. And so, you know, you've kind of introduced how you kind of discovered the suffrage, the women's movement. And I think you've been researching the women's movement for a long time. Is there anything that surprised you in either Born Criminal or The Voice of Liberty that you kind of discovered as you were working on these works?
Well, I think how very radical Matilda Jocelyn Gage was. She believed in equal rights for everyone, regardless of race, creed, color, level of income. She was, and lately it's sort of come out that Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony did not necessarily think that. But Matilda was ahead of her time then, and I think if she were here now, she'd still be ahead of her time, wanting equal pay for equal work, and she especially wanted women to have the rights to their own bodies. I mean, things like that. She was adamant then, and it's 100 years later, and she'd still be that way today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of her ideas are why, in some ways, we don't remember her now, and is my understanding. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. She was too radical for the rest of them. The rest of them didn't want to hear that kind of radical talk because it offended some conservative women who might otherwise have voted for women's suffrage, but didn't want to hear that kind of talk. So yeah, they had a falling out.
A lot of what's coming out now is the voices that were silenced because they weren't wanting to offend other people. And so it's great that we can learn about Matilda now, and we can learn about those other voices as well. Ed, what was your experience with the women's suffrage movement in America? Did you, when you were growing up in Australia, did you hear about a women's suffrage movement there?
Not particularly. I mean, let's see. I mean, I was educated in Australia for my elementary and secondary education, and I went to college here. So, like, the American experience. And I was born in this country, but I left when I was 5. So I definitely feel like I grew up in Australia. But, well, remarkably, I will mention this. In my Australian education, I was taught about things like the American Revolution and the Civil Rights Movement and stuff like that. We didn't go so deeply into American history that we went into the suffrage movement though. I guess, unfortunately. I mean, yes, unfortunately. Yeah, so I wasn't aware of it, but I was aware of it as a young adult after moving here and going to college.
So when the press came to you and with this manuscript and concept of this children's picture book, what were your first thoughts? If you can think back that far.
Yes.
For those who don't know, children's picture takes a couple years to put together.
I know, it's a long time ago. Well, I thought it was, there was humor in it. And again, it was like something that I was not an expert in. I was totally willing to just go and check it out and learn about it. I love learning about stuff, and any excuse, and doing a picture book is a pretty good excuse to learn about things. And I had an inkling of, I mean, I certainly knew about women's suffrage movement. I just didn't know anything about the characters involved. I mean, I certainly knew about Susan B. Anthony, but I did not know about myself. And so this is like, I don't know. I mean, just as a human being, as a person on this planet, as an interested person, a person who has a liberal arts education, I don't mind still learning stuff. And I take this as an opportunity. And so that's what interests me about it always.
Yeah, well, and when we first got this manuscript, being, just growing up, you hear about certain folks and you certainly know that women didn't have the right to vote at some time. But as Angelica has said, you don't necessarily internalize that because that was so long ago. And yet for me, none of my grandmothers could vote in the year that they were born, if they had been of age and everything when they, and so it was just fascinating. And then to find out that, and so Born Criminal was amazing to learn all that. And then to find out that the Statue of Liberty was the site of a protest was just fascinating. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, the whole Liberty thing, that had all sorts of intrigue for me because there was the international aspect of it. The fact that this suffrage movement was actually, it was an international problem, as you stated in the book. It's not like, it wasn't just an American problem. And that whole thing about they can't vote in France either. I mean, I love it that it just sort of opened it up to the whole world and, or the whole Western world, I guess. But yeah, I just love, we can't know everything, and learning new stuff is just a huge part of living a full life. So any chance, all of these books I've done have been like brand new experiences for me.
Yeah, so kudos to you, Angelica, for introducing both of us to ideas and to events that we didn't really think about before.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you. I didn't know much about Matilda till I started writing about L. Frank Baum, so it's the same for me. I mean, I love him. I knew his work very well, but to find out that his mother-in-law was internationally famous was quite a surprise to me, too.
Yeah, well, and it's great, a lot of people will look at both the books you've done for us and be like, why did the South Dakota Historical Society Press put them out into the world? And
they asked me that, too.
Yeah, but I think it's very interesting because it really does show that these women were impactful, not just in New York. They impacted the whole United States. And if you could speak to that and kind of finding those connections.
Yeah, well, Matilda spent a lot of time traveling, and she started at a time when women were not supposed to travel alone. Hotels wouldn't rent them rooms, restaurants wouldn't serve single women. But she traveled extensively, and she made I can't remember when, but early when South Dakota was trying to become a state, she toured the state making speeches, trying to get women included in the Constitution. And that was hard because the population was quite spread out, and a lot of the new settlers didn't speak English, but she just did it. She went, I can't remember the name of, the women she went with, Clara somebody. Sorry, I can't remember.
I'm the wrong person to ask. I know generals, unfortunately. But
okay, well, anyway, her kids all lived in Dakota Territory, and three of them in Aberdeen and one near Edgeley, and so she could go out there, and she lived with the Baums during the winter. I don't know why anybody would pick to live in Aberdeen during the winter, but she did, and so she was in Dakota a lot, and she liked it. Aberdeen was quite a thriving town then, where railroads met, and the business was good until the drought came, and a lot of intellectuals were there. They had a lot of social life, and she really enjoyed herself there. So they gave seances, and she had a great time.
Yeah, well, and her granddaughter would become a big part of recording kind of our movement in South Dakota and that sort of thing, because she
Exactly.
had family that still lived here years and years later. So
Her granddaughter was the daughter of Matilda's son, and she saved all the letters that Matilda had written to her son. So sometimes people ask me about that first book, why are there so many letters to her son? Didn't she write to her daughters too? Well, yes, she did. She wrote to everybody, but it was that one granddaughter who saved the letters that preserved the record, and now they're at Radcliffe, so anyone can read them if they can read her handwriting.
yeah.
I
How did
love
you?
that handwriting.
Sorry, Ed, what did you say?
I was just going to say, I really love seeing that handwriting. It reminds me of Doctor's handwriting. It's just rolled. I love it.
Terrible.
Yeah. Well,
That's
yes.
my favorite letter that I showed. It's a letter to her son, and she's in Philadelphia, and she's fighting a battle to have the World's Fair kept open on Sunday because religious people want it closed, but she thought it should be open on Sunday because that was the only day working people could come. And violence was threatened, so she wrote to her son, and she said, I want you to bring my revolver and cartridges, have it serviced first. That's my favorite letter. And he did come to visit her in Philadelphia, and we don't know if he brought the gun, but we do know she didn't shoot anybody.
Well, and I mean, she may not have shot anybody, but she was arrested at one time because she.
Oh, well, she was arrested.
Yeah. For
Registered to vote, right? Yeah, she was found guilty too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so yeah, I guess what, you know, the last kind of thing I'm interested in kind of knowing, and hopefully the audience is too, you know, what kind of were the hardest things to put together for this book, and then also kind of, and you both have kind of touched on this, but what was your favorite piece of working on this book?
Who's going?
I'll go first. Getting it published. Getting it published. That was just wonderful. I loved it.
All of the editing kind of, it can take time. Yes.
That's always my pat answer, but it's true. My favorite part of anything, any project, is finishing. I'm not. Yeah. I mean, I do enjoy the process, but finishing it is wow. I just love finishing a project.
I belong to a critique group with teachers. Some former teachers are in it, so they're always telling me my books have to fit the curriculum. That drives me crazy. So that's why I always talk about doing the research. And they set up, they need craft projects to do with kids. And so we have little Statue of Liberty torches now that we can make, or Statue of Liberty cutout figures. That's been a lot of fun. And we had, my granddaughter was here visiting when we got those patterns, and so we had family craft day. That was really fun.
And those patterns will be available on the press website, sdhspress.com, by the time that this airs. And so we'll make sure that anyone who wants to do a Voice of Liberty or Statue of Liberty craft, they can.
Oh, I forgot to show one more. My husband made this one this spring. This is a Cubist Statue of Liberty. Thank you, Ed.
Well, thank you both for joining me today, and thank you to the South Dakota Humanities Council for putting all this together. You know, it's been great that we can, you know, change as needed during these kind of crazy times. Is there anything, any final comments either one of you would like to make? Angelica, we can begin with you.
I forgot to say it's Dave Kelleher who designed these projects, and I just want to say it's so nice to actually meet Ed. I've never met him or talked to him before, so it's great to see you. And I wondered if you would have an Australian accent, and you do. And you too, Jennifer's. I know you from before, so it's nice to see you again too.
I echo that. I've exchanged a lot of emails with Ed, but we've never spoken face to face, much less heard each other's voices. So.
No, it's really wonderful to meet you all. Yeah, and I want to just thank, all of you for involving me in this. I really enjoyed it. It was a smooth process, and they're not always that way. So I'm grateful to be involved, and I like what we did. I hope other people do. I think it's important work. The funny thing about these historical biographies is that they're, in an economic sense, they're not usually, really heavy hitters. It's not, like Fancy Nancy or something, but they are so necessary. And it's just a part of the sort of canon of work that's out there that needs to be out there. Just, more stuff for people to see. I just think it's great. And thanks to the South Dakota Historical Press for doing this. I know it's hard and expensive and takes a long time and a lot of effort, but it's worth it. It's great to have this stuff out there. So thanks.
Well, thank you. Yes, and speaking to the expense, click on the link that Jennifer Widman at the beginning mentioned. You can purchase books and support wonderful authors and wonderful artists and amazing independent small presses. And I do want to say a final shout out to the editor of this book, who we keep kind of mentioning the editing. Nancy Tysted Copel founded the South Dakota Historical Society Press and works tirelessly to make sure the authors, illustrators, and readers are all happy with the work that we produce. And so thank you to her. And again, thank you to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and from the South Dakota Festival of Books, thank you for participating. Thank you for sharing your work with the readers of South Dakota, whether they are young or of any other age. We hope that a lot of them will get to learn more about this book through watching the video, and maybe they'll pick up a copy. So I appreciate all three of you being here today.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and visit SD Book Festival and poke around on the site for other authors' videos as well, but keep reading.